Okay, so now we're going to do intercepts. So there are two kinds of intercepts. So when you think of an intercept, like that's when something crosses paths with something else, right? You think of like in football, the other team interferes, intercepts a ball, catches it, right? So if you have your X and your Y axis here, they intercept right here at the origin, right? Sorry, I made a little mark. And so now we want to figure out how does the line relate to both the X and the Y axis. So we want to find the X intercept, which is where the line crosses the X axis. Okay, so you can see that's right there. This is where the line crosses the X axis. Then we have the Y intercept, where the line crosses the Y axis. Okay, so every line, so that was right there. Okay, so this one's the X intercept. This is the Y intercept. I'm just continuing. This is that same one I did right at the end of the previous video. It's like that line. Okay, we're going to find the XY intercept. So sometimes you can just look at a graph and see it. So we can see right here, sorry, it doesn't line up perfectly, but the Y-intercept is 0, -3. And the X-intercept, I fixed the graph in between the videos because I know that X-intercept is supposed to be 6, 0. Okay, so if we really think about it in terms of the graph, right, the Y-intercept is where X equals 0, right? Because in order for our line to be on the Y-intercept, that means X has to be 0, right? Because if X is 1, then now we're on this plane. If X is 2, we're on this one, right? But we want X to be 0 so that we can be directly here on the Y-axis, right? So the Y-intercept is where X equals 0. Following that logic, the X-intercept is where Y equals 0. Okay, so let's say you don't have a graph. Let's say we just have our equation, X minus 2Y equals 6. And I want to find the X and Y intercepts. So you can do this by graphing, but sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes you graph it, especially if you're working with real life data, you graph it and then it's like a decimal, right? It's like, oh, it intercepts at 1.3742, whatever, right? So you can actually use algebra to find the intercept if you just remember these rules, right? So if I want to find the X intercept, remember that's where Y equals 0. Okay, so that means I want to solve for X. Y equals 0, so I'm plugging it in. X minus 0, X equals 6. So the Y-intercept is 6, 0. And this is me using algebra to find it. But if you look above, I got the same answer when I graphed it too, right? So maybe you want to find it by graphing. You want to find where does the line cross the x-axis, right there. Or you can use algebra, remembering this little rule. Right, the Y-intercept, and the Y-intercept's actually the one you're going to use way more, just much more often. So this is where X equals 0. So this time I'm going to substitute into X and solve for Y, because I know X. Okay, so the Y-intercept is 0, -3. And if we look again right here, see, that's what I got when I graphed. So whether you decide to graph it or use algebra, you're going to get the same answer. But you should know both ways, because sometimes graphing is not going to be, you know, it's going to be like a decimal or it won't come out. Or especially if you're not using a grid like me, it might not, just because it's hard to make our axes perfect and like symmetrical and everything, you might think you have the right intercept, but you don't, just because you're freehanding a graph. So unless you're using grid paper and a ruler or like a computer app, I would recommend using the algebra way, where you plug in these two values to find your intercepts, just because it's, if you're just going to freehand it, it's not going to be accurate. Right, and so let's just do the dog park example again. And let's find the X and Y intercepts, okay, using algebra. So the X intercept, right, is where Y equals 0. So I'm plugging that in, so I just get 0 there. Divide both sides by 3, X equals 10. So this is the X intercept, 10, 0. Right, and then the Y intercept, this is where X equals 0. So again, I'm just going to plug it in. 3 times 0, that's just 0. Okay, so 0, 15. This is where, if we were going to graph this, this is where our line is going to cross the y-axis, and this is where our line is going to cross the x-axis. Okay, and we'll actually regraph this again soon.